Joshua chapter 14, if you'll turn with me to Joshua chapter 14. Without going over anything in the past, I just want to push forward today in Joshua 14. So let's start with verse number 1. It's pretty self-explanatory what's going on here. For these are the territories which the sons of Israel, these are the territories which the sons of Israel inherited in the land of Canaan, which Eleazar the priest and Joshua the son of Nun and the heads of the households of the tribes of the sons of Israel apportioned to them for an inheritance. So what we're talking about here is Israel. Finally, after 500 years, the promise having been given by God to Abraham that he would give Abraham and all of his descendants a piece of earth that would uniquely be theirs for all time. Finally, after 500 or so years, Israel is ready to go. They're already in the land. They've already gone through battle conquest under Joshua, but they're ready for this land to be divided among the tribes. The Jewish tribes, the 12 Jewish tribes. A couple of things here. If you'll notice, Eleazar is mentioned. Now, Eleazar is... What happened here? That's not right. Do y'all remember who Eleazar is? Remember, Moses had a brother who was the first high priest of Israel. His name was Aaron. And Aaron had 4 sons, and the third son was Eleazar. Eleazar is Aaron's son, Moses' nephew, and he is the high priest of Israel. He's the one in Exodus chapter 28, 29, this idea of the high priest and all his garments, all his raiments. You wonder, why would the high priest, why would the spiritual leader of Israel be involved in the apportioning, the distributing, the dividing of the land of Canaan? What does the priest have to do with that? It seems like an administrative function, like Joshua as the military ruler and the administrative ruler, the president of the country, if you will. It would seem that Joshua could do this on his own. But the priest is involved. And if you'll remember, underneath that breastplate, you see that white, sorry it's off color to the picture, but that square that's on his chest, it has 12 stones on it. And each of those stones represents one of the tribes of Israel. This breastplate was folded. It was 2 pieces. So instead of just being a single piece of cloth, it's a doubled piece of cloth that's folded like that, having made a pocket. You can see how now there's a pocket here where you can get something into it. This is what's inside that breastplate. Look at what it says in Exodus 28, verse 30. I'm telling you this to answer the question, what does Aaron's son Eleazar have to do with deciding what tribe gets what land? In Exodus 28:30 it says, "You shall put in the breastplate of the judgment." That's that breastplate with the 12 stones on it. This is what's inside of it. The Urim and the Thummim. Believed probably to be 2 stones. Maybe one black stone, maybe one white stone. Not exactly understood how these stones were used by the priest and by God. But they were clearly so that the priest could determine God's will in situations. That's what they were. They were for the lot. So you shall put in the breastplate, the judgment, the breastpiece of judgment, the Urim and Thummim, and they shall be over Aaron's heart. Now this is Eleazar, Aaron's son, who's inherited this from his father, the high priesthood. They shall be over Aaron's heart when he goes in before Yahweh the Lord, and Aaron shall carry the judgment of the sons of Israel over his heart before the Lord continually. So these 2 things, this Urim and this Thummim in his breastplate, that are in the pouch of the breastplate, were how God somehow, the rabbis have, you can imagine Jewish rabbis, if there's 10 of them, there's 11 opinions. They all have a different idea of how the Urim and Thummim were used by God to show the will of God. But clearly, when we speak in this chapter about the lot, The lot, L-O-T, small case L, the lot going to the land, to the tribe of Judah first, then the lot moving to the tribe of Issachar next, or whatever tribe is next. This lot is being determined by these two things, the Urim and the Thummim, the priest. God is showing His will and what land each people will get, and who comes first and who comes second based on the priest's breastplate and this Urim and Thummim. That's what they are. They determine the will of God. This isn't Joshua throwing dice just to see what number comes up. Okay, everybody pick a number between 1 and 10 and starts casting some lots, throwing dice. Okay, it's 6. Judah, you go first. This was all orderly. This was all designed by Yahweh. He knew exactly where He wanted each tribe to be in this land of Canaan. There's nothing disorderly about the way God handles mankind. It's all perfectly orderly. So that's what we see here, and that's why Eleazar is an integral part in determining what the land would look like for Israel. You see all the land divisions there. You see all the names, all the different colors. These are the 12 tribes, the 12 sons of Jacob, the 12 tribes of Israel, and the land that Yahweh would give each of them. None of this is happenstance. None of this is just, let's make the border here. He had a specific reason for every city name, for every river and creek and brook name that He gives in these books. It's all predetermined by the omniscience of God that this is where these people would live. It says for the 9.5 tribes, look what it says in verse 2, by the lot, apportion the inheritance by the lot. That's that Urim and Thummim, by the lot of their inheritance, as Yahweh commanded through Moses, for the 9.5 tribes. For the 9 tribes and the half tribe. Now remember, without belaboring this too much, remember that the land of Canaan started at the river Jordan. All this you see to the right or to the east of the river Jordan is not technically the land of Canaan. Not until they crossed the Jordan River would they be in the land of Canaan. All of this land, the promised land, the land of Canaan. So 9.5 tribes is what it just says that Moses, what the Lord commanded through Moses, and now the 9.5 tribes are to get their land. And that's because 2.5 tribes, as we've seen, have already received their inheritance. They got their piece of dirt in the Transjordan, across the Jordan. Remember, they were shepherds and herders. And when they got to the land there, the land of Moab, they looked around, and each of the tribal leaders said, this is good land for us. We have multiple flocks, and this is the type of land that our flocks could thrive in. Moses, will you give us this land? Instead of taking us across the river, we like this dirt. And so the Lord allowed Moses to apportion pieces of land to the tribes of Gad, Reuben, and Manasseh, the half of the tribe of Manasseh. You see there on both sides of the river, that gold color. So 2.5 tribes have already gotten their territories on the east side of the river. That's why here it says 9 tribes and the half tribe. We keep going, verse 3. For Moses had given, he explains it, why only 9 tribes and a half. For Moses had given the inheritance of the 2 tribes, that's Gad and Reuben, and the half tribe, that's the half tribe of Manasseh, beyond the Jordan, on the east side of the Jordan. But he did not give an inheritance to the Levites among them. We spoke at length about the Levites, the priests, last time. We won't go into that again. And then he mentions something else here that's important to remember. Now, remember what was the guy's name whose brothers sold him into slavery? Who went down to Egypt, who was sold into Potiphar's house, who was Potiphar's wife tried to seduce him. She turns the story on the guy. He gets thrown in prison. Eventually he comes out of prison because he tells Pharaoh's dream to him, and Pharaoh elevates him to the second highest in command in Egypt. What was his name? His name was Joseph. What was his father's name? Jacob. I'm saying this because Joseph was one of the 12 sons of Jacob. Joseph is one of the 12 tribes of Israel. But when you look at that map, there are two names that are missing from Jacob's sons. The two names that are missing are Levi, number one, the priestly tribe, because they would settle all throughout. They would get cities all throughout. We've spoken of that before. So you don't see, when you read all these names, Asher, Naphtali, Zebulun, Issachar, Manasseh, Ephraim, Dan, Gad, Reuben, Judah, Simeon, you don't see two names. And the two names are Levi and Joseph. Now, why don't you see Joseph's names? Do you remember what Joseph's sons' names were? He had two sons, and he named one of them Ephraim, and he named the other one Manasseh. And so what happened with Joseph is that Joseph was the son that Jacob elevated to get the double portion. The oldest son in the family, the firstborn son, was the son who had the right to inherit the rulership from his father, and he also had the right of a double portion. All of the 11 sons would get one portion each, but to the first son, the firstborn from the womb, to him belonged the double portion. Now, if you remember, Joseph was not the firstborn son of Jacob. He was way down the list. But if you also remember, Reuben was the firstborn son of Jacob. You see him, he's the Reubenites. He was the firstborn son of Jacob. But he did some things, if you go back into the book of Genesis, to lose the right of the double portion. He lost the right of the double portion, and he also lost the right of rulership. Because of his actions and his choices, the firstborn fell from grace, let's say. So God had to choose a new tribal leader, a new ruler, and that would be the tribe of Judah. That would be his fourth son, Judah, that God gave the right of the firstborn to rule. He took that from Reuben and gave it to the tribe of Judah, who is the tribe that Jesus Christ comes from. King David, King Solomon, etc. They're all Judahites. But God had another issue. He had that double portion rule. If Reuben lost the right to rule, and Reuben also lost the double portion, to which son will I give the double portion to? And the answer was to Joseph. And that's why you don't see Joseph's name on the board here in a certain territory. But what you see is that God took both of Joseph's sons. So instead of just having one spot named Joseph, you've got two spots that represent Joseph, his son Ephraim and his son Manasseh. It's clear in my mind. I hope I made it clear in yours. I know that's a lot of names and a lot of history and a lot of info. But you have to understand this map to understand, just to see the flow of history and how a part of this is how humans and their choices have consequences. And you see Reuben down there, who should own the land of that Jerusalem would be in, and he had to give that to Judah. And you see Reuben also, who should have a double portion in the land as the firstborn, and he had to give that to his brother Joseph. Ephraim and Manasseh. So sin has consequences. Choices have consequences. Reuben and his tribes didn't even enter the promised land at that time. Very interesting to look at the map. So Moses had given the inheritance of the two tribes and the half tribe beyond the Jordan. He didn't give any inheritance to the Levites. And then verse 4 talks about what I just told you. For the sons of Joseph, who got the double portion, were two tribes, Manasseh and Ephraim. And they did not give a portion to the Levites in the land. Again, the priest would settle all throughout the land. The priests, the Levites, would have cities in every one of these apportioned areas. The priests would live. They were the teachers of Israel. The priests were the teachers of Israel, teaching the law to the generation after generation, so they had to live everywhere. The sons of Joseph didn't give a portion of Levites except cities to live in with their pasture lands for their livestock and for their property. Thus, verse 5, thus the sons of Israel did just as the Lord had commanded Moses, and they divided the land. And you see the divisions, at least the rough divisions here on the board. If you looked at 10 maps of 10 scholars, and I'm no scholar when it comes to these archaeological places. Most of these places aren't on the map. Archaeologists haven't been able to determine where they are. We don't know where they are. Many of the cities listed in these lists in the next few chapters, they're just gone to antiquities. They're under the dust now. But if you looked at 10 maps that show where the tribes of Israel are, they're all going to be slightly different. And I only mean slightly different. They're going to have each of these tribes here. Often you'll see, just to show you one thing, if you see up here there's a city, I don't know if you can read that, but it says Dan, judge. But you see the tribe of Dan settled down here. So on a lot of maps, maybe even the map in your Bible, you'll see not only Dan here, but you'll see that dark green in a little corner up here also. So they would indicate that the tribe of Dan had split in where they stayed in the land. True or false, I don't know. I want to talk about something just for a minute. I want to bring this 1,500-year-old history present. I want to bring it into 2022 for a second because of this statement. Maybe you've heard this in the news. You guys, I know Terry's a prophecy watcher, likes to listen to a lot of prophecy and read scriptures about prophecy. I know there are others interested in this. In Joshua 14:5, he mentions this phrase that Israel did according to the Lord, and they divided the land. Now, there's a lot of talk today about dividing the land of Israel. I'm saying this because it's not what Israel did on this day. In Joshua chapter 14, verse 5, Israel divided the land amongst themselves. It was all Jews in the land of Canaan. It was supposed to be all Jews. All of the Gentiles were, except the Gentiles that came in with them, the followers of Yahweh. But the pagan Gentiles in the land of Canaan, remember, they were all to be killed. This land was to be controlled, occupied, lived in by Jews, worshipers of Yahweh only. And they had to divide it so that they would know which tribe got which piece of land according to the priest's lot that he would cast. But in the news today, you'll hear a lot about dividing the land, that God is going to judge the nations for dividing the land of Israel. I'm trying to tell you simply that it was God's will on this day in Joshua to divide the land. That's not what we hear when we talk about divide the land today. The point is that no other people on earth, listen to this fact, no other people on earth would ever have the right to own and occupy a piece of the land of Canaan. It belongs to Israel. It belongs to Yahweh, and Yahweh, God, has given it to Israel and only Israel. No one else has the right to own that land. So when we get to the passage in Joel chapter 3, and if you read anything or watch any videos on end times, this is big in the news. Look what it says in Joel chapter 3, verse 1 and 2. You'll go down, drop your eyes to the very last line on that screen. And they have divided up my land. In Joshua chapter 14, this was the will of God, that the land be divided amongst the Jews. But there's a day coming that Joel chapter 3 says, when God will come to earth and enter into judgment with the Gentile nations who have divided up the land of Israel as if to take ownership of it for themselves, because the land belongs to God's people, Israel, and the 12 sons of Jacob. Joel chapter 3 verse 1 says, "For behold, in those days and at that time, when I restore the fortunes of Judah and Jerusalem." So he's on the side of Judah and Jerusalem. He's restoring their fortunes. But what about his relationship with the Gentile nations? God's relationship. He says, "I'll gather all the nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat." Where's that on the map? We'll talk about it in just a second. It's not on a map. It's not on a current map. He says, but God says there is a time in the future, and it's still future, it has not occurred yet. This is the second coming of Jesus Christ when He'll do this. "I'll gather all the nations, I'll bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat, and then I will enter judgment with them there on behalf of my people Israel, my inheritance Israel. And this is why, whom they have scattered among the nations, and they have divided up my land." So we know right now that the nations have cast Israel to the four winds, the four corners of the earth. The Jews live all over the world. They're not centered in the land of Canaan today. But there's something else that Joel brings out there, that God is going to enter into judgment with the nations for tampering with the borders in the land of Canaan, the promised land. It's God's land, and He's given it to Israel forever. And part of the judgment that is coming is because Israel has divided the land, or the nations are using the land of Canaan and apportioning it off to people who are not Jews. The valley of Jehoshaphat, one thought. This is a thought that I have, many other scholars. I stand on bigger shoulders than my own when I say this. There is no valley of Jehoshaphat today. We've got the Kidron Valley, the Jezreel Valley, the Valley of the Cheesemakers. It's a different one by a different name in the Hebrew, but it's there. The Valley of Hinnom. We have several valleys that you can find on an Israel map. You will not find on any Israeli map the Valley of Jehoshaphat. And you know why I think that is? Because I don't think it exists right now. Look what happens in Zechariah chapter 14. This valley of Jehoshaphat is only found two places in the Bible. One of them is right here in Joel chapter 3 verse 1, and the other one is in Joel chapter 3 verse 12. Joel's the only prophet that the Lord used this name through. But I wonder if it's the valley that's created by Jesus Christ when His feet hit the Mount of Olives at the second coming. Look what Zechariah chapter 14 verse 4 says. This is Jesus Christ in His second coming when we, the church, come back with Him. He's on His white horse from Revelation 19. And this is what happens when Jesus Christ's feet touch planet Earth here, right across from the Temple Mount. In that day, His feet, we're talking about Messiah, Jesus, in that day His feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which is in front of Jerusalem on the east. And the Mount of Olives will be split in its middle from east to west by a very large valley. Now, interesting that we're not given the name of that valley, but also interesting that when the nations come against Jerusalem, they surround the old city Jerusalem, and probably this new valley where God's going to kill many of them. The valley will be split, or the Mount of Olives will split in two, so that half the mountain will move toward the north and the other half toward the south. And all of a sudden we have what's called a valley between mountain peaks that doesn't have a name in Zechariah chapter 14. I believe that that valley is the valley of Jehoshaphat, the valley of where the Lord judges. Jehoshaphat means the Lord judges. That's what the name Jehoshaphat means. A Shaphat is a judge, and a Yeh, the beginning of it, is the shortened form of Yahweh. Jehoshaphat, the Lord judges the nations. And that's exactly what He's coming back to do when His feet touch the Mount of Olives. So he says, I'll enter into judgment with them because they've divided up my land. So God here, speaking of the Gentile nations who will divide the promised land. I say I'm going to bring this into 2022, and this is what's happening in Israel today. You've heard it for many, many years now, and the idea is this two-state solution. If you've heard that in the news, I'm sure you all have at some point or another, that the problem in Israel, the problems with the Jews and the Arabs that they call the Muslims, they're calling the Palestinians, the problem can be solved. There can be peace in Israel if we give Israel, the Jews, part of the land and give the Muslims, the Arabs, the Palestinians, the other part of the land. And God says, I own that land and I have given it to Israel. No one else. And one day God will come back and will judge the nations, partly because they have messed with the boundaries of the land of Canaan that He gave to Israel. The two-state solution. You see on the board there, right here, this green line, all this area in here, and you see Jerusalem is right on the border of it. All this area is called the West Bank. It's under Palestinian authority. The Jews, when you talk about or when you hear about the settlements, these settlements that the Jews are going in and they're making these settlements, these cities, they're not villages, they're cities. That the Jews are making these cities in the West Bank and they're illegally in the West Bank because all this territory belongs to Palestine and the Palestinians and the Arabs. What do you say when you open the Bible? Oh, no, it doesn't. The Jews have every right to that land. That is Jewish land given to the tribe of Manasseh. This was all Manasseh's land and Judah's land down here. But you see the West Bank. Over here you see the Gaza Strip, Palestinian owned, run by a terrorist organization called Hamas. They own the Gaza Strip. And up here you'll see the Golan Heights. These are just names that are in the news all the time. The West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and the Golan Heights. They've divided. The nations are trying to divide the land of Israel. Israel acts like they don't care about it, and they go into the West Bank and they make settlements in the West Bank because it's their land. And they know it's their land because they have the Torah, they have the Old Testament, they have the Tanakh, they have Joshua chapter 14. They know that God apportioned this land to their ancestors. But that's the world's solution. Let's divide the land, give part of it to Gentile nations. And one day the Lord is going to come back, and He has said in Joel chapter 3, I told you not to do this. This land belongs to Israel and no one else. So, when you read about this two-state solution, as good as it may sound, it will never ever work, and it's not God's will that the land of Canaan be divided. It's Jewish land and always is intended to be Jewish land. We go back to the book, Joshua 14, verse 6. Then the sons of Judah drew near. Why did the sons of Judah draw near? Why is this fourth son of Jacob the first one to draw near to Joshua and the priests and the other elders of Israel? Because their name was drawn first by Lot. By Lot, by the Urim and the Thummim. So their lot was drawn. They are going to get their inheritance, their piece of land first. So the sons of Judah drew near to Joshua and Gilgal, and now we have this excursus, if you will, this small story about Caleb, who is almost parenthetically put into Joshua chapter 14. Yes, all the tribe of Judah comes forth to get their land, but let's talk about Caleb, one of the sons of Judah, for a minute, and that's what happens in verse 6 here. Caleb is one of the sons of Judah. He's a Judahite. And Caleb interjects himself into the story here. Look what it says. Caleb, the son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite, said to him, to Joshua, he's giving him a bit of his life story. Caleb is reminding Joshua of their history together so that he can make a special request of Joshua. He says, "You know the word which Yahweh spoke to Moses, the man of God, concerning you and me in Kadesh Barnea." So all of a sudden, Caleb and Joshua, he has reminded Joshua, "Friend, you and I have a special history together. We were 2 of the 12 spies that went into the land of Canaan from Kadesh Barnea." Very interesting that he brings up history. And he keeps on with the story. Caleb telling his friend Joshua, he said, "I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land. And I brought word back to him as was in my heart." Literally that, as was in my heart, as it was in my heart, means according to my convictions. What I thought was true was exactly what I told the people of Israel. And you'll see that God blessed him greatly for speaking according to his convictions. "I was 40 years old when Moses sent me in as a spy, as one of the 12 spies." Now, Caleb didn't minimize, this is important to understand, Caleb didn't minimize the facts in the land of Canaan. Caleb didn't say there really aren't giants there, and Caleb didn't say there really aren't fortified cities there. Caleb understood the problems that they would have to overcome going into the land, but what Caleb did is instead of maximizing the problem, Caleb maximized the solution to the problem, God himself. Caleb made God huge, and the power of God is what Caleb made big. Yeah, they're giants, and I don't know how we're going to kill those giants, but I don't have to know because I know my God. And yes, they're fortified cities, and we can't tear those down with our stones and our spears. I don't know how we're going to attack those cities and take them over, but I don't have to know because I know my God, and I know He's omnipotent. I know He's all-powerful. I say, let's wake up in the morning and go into the land. That's what Caleb said. Verse 8, it says, "Nevertheless," because of what he had said and spoken his convictions about his faith in God, "Nevertheless, my brethren," he's talking about his fellow Jews, those 10 spies that went in with him, "my brethren who went up with me, made the heart of the Jewish people melt with fear. But I followed the Lord my God fully." Let's not forget who we are, Joshua. Let's not forget who we are. We are the 2 spies that did what was right before the Lord. A couple of verses here just to get us back into this idea of what exactly happened. Just a few verses to get you back into that story to understand what happened with the spies. In Numbers 13, 1 and 2, the Lord spoke to Moses. He said, "Send out for yourself men so that they may spy out the land of Canaan, which I'm going to give to the sons of Israel," not to the Palestinians. "You shall send a man from each of their fathers' tribes, each one a leader among them." So God tells Moses, pick 12 men. There are 12 tribes. I want one man from each tribe. And then it lists all those 12 men in Numbers 13:6. From the tribe of Judah, Caleb, the son of Jephunneh. Caleb. In Numbers 13, so the tribe of Judah had their man that was going to be a spy. In 13:16, we read, these are the names of the men who Moses sent to spy out the land. One of them's name was Hoshea. In that list, it names Hoshea of the tribe of Ephraim. But Moses didn't want to call him Hoshea. Moses changed this man from Hoshea. He changed his name to Yehoshua, which means Yahweh saves. So Moses called Hoshea, the son of Nun, Joshua, Yehoshua, which means Yahweh saves, or Yahweh is salvation. So the 12 spies are chosen. In Numbers 13:25, when they returned from spying out the land, at the end of the 40 days, they proceeded to come to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation of the sons of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. This is what Caleb is reminding Joshua of. If you read there in Joshua 14 verse 7, he sent me from Kadesh Barnea. That's this. That's Numbers 13. Kadesh, there's the name. These spies brought back word to them and to all the congregation, and they showed them the fruit of the land. But we know that what he just said, the nations were, the people of Israel were terrified when they heard about the giants. They heard about the fortified cities. And in Numbers 13:30, this is what Caleb did on that day 40 years ago. Caleb quieted the people before Moses. He took control of the room. Caleb quieted the people before Moses, and he said, "We should by all means go up and take possession of it, for we shall surely overcome it. If God is for us, who can be against us?" That was Caleb's conviction that Yahweh will see this through. Caleb having come across the Red Sea on dry ground, Caleb having lived through the 10 plagues, Caleb didn't need any more proof that Yahweh could do what he said he could do. That Yahweh could do what he said he would do. We will surely overcome it. So, going back to the story here, verse 9, Joshua 14:9. This is what Caleb is reminding Joshua of, this event. And he says, because of what I did, because of my convictions, because I stood for the Lord on that day, and I didn't have fear, I trusted Yahweh, Moses swore on that day. And this is what Moses said, Joshua, you remember this. Surely the land on which your foot has trodden, Caleb, will be an inheritance to you and to your children forever. And there's a reason why. Why does Caleb get a special plot of land? Because you have followed the Lord my God fully. Those were Moses' words to Caleb. So Caleb is reminding Joshua. We know that this decision wasn't Moses' decision. To give Caleb a special plot of land was not Moses' decision. It was Yahweh's decision. Look what it says in Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 34. Then Yahweh heard the sound of your words. This is about the spies and the foolish Israelites who were terrified to go into the land. Yahweh heard the sound of your words, and he was angry. And he took an oath, and he said, not one of these men, this evil generation, shall see the good land which I swore to give their fathers. Not one of them. 603,550 men would be numbered. And not one of them, God says, would go in, except, and these are God's words, Yahweh, except Caleb the son of Jephunneh, he shall see it. And to him and to his sons I will give the land on which he has set his foot, because he has followed me, Yahweh, fully. So whose decision was it that Caleb would be able to step forth and claim to Joshua to tell his historical facts and to say, I'm here to get my land? Very interesting story. It's almost like he had a land grant and 45 years had gone by, and now he's bringing that scroll of the land grant promise and saying, open that up and see who that land belongs to, Joshua, and you will remember that it was promised to me and mine. I'm here to get it. I'm here to get it. So we see that Yahweh made Caleb this promise. 45 years earlier, Yahweh makes a promise to Caleb, and now, 45 years later, Caleb is ready to take God at His word. He's ready to conquer the hillside, he's ready to kill the giants that are there, and he's ready to overtake the fortified cities. Look what he says in verse 10, now behold, the Lord Yahweh has let me live. What if Caleb would have died in the conquests? What does that make God? In the 7 years that Joshua has been leading the united Israeli army and cutting off the head of the snake, as I've said, and killing all these Gentile nations, these pagans in the land of Canaan, what if Caleb would have taken an arrow and died? What would be the problem with that, with the Bible? What would be the problem with that? If God would have allowed, Caleb makes this statement, behold, the Lord has let me live. Because if Caleb would have died, the promise that God made to Caleb 45 years earlier would not be able to come to pass, and that would make God a liar. So the fact, it'd make him a non-promise-keeping God. I would have loved him in Caleb in the conquest. Can you imagine how bold he could have been? He could have done anything he wanted to do. There was no way this man could die during the 7 years of conquest because God had made him a promise and it had not come true yet. I don't know that, as I think through this, I don't know of anyone in the Bible who quite had the protections by the promise of God that Caleb had over the 45 years from when he spied the land to when he received that land as his own. Absolutely protected by the hand of God because God had made him a promise. Fascinating book. Now behold, the Lord has let me live just as He spoke because He promised me. He's let me live these 45 years from the time that the Lord spoke this word to Moses, that Caleb would get this land. When Israel walked in the wilderness, from then until today, behold, I'm 85 years old. So again, God makes a promise to Caleb that he would get the land that he stood on, that he walked through when he spied the land of Canaan. And how long has Caleb been waiting for God's promise to come true? 45 years. Imagine that. 45 years Caleb has been patiently waiting, convinced that God would keep His word, patiently waiting for the promise of God to come true to him. I will own this hillside one day. I'm just waiting for it. 45 years go by, God comes along to keep His promise. Verse 11 says, I'm still as strong today as I was in the day Moses sent me to spy out the land. As my strength was then, so my strength is now, for war and for going out and coming in. Another way to say war. 85-year-old man Caleb says, I'm as strong and ready for warfare today as I was then. Times were different then. You 85-year-olds, don't beat yourselves up. In verse 12 he says, Now then give me this hill country about which the Lord spoke on that day. For you heard on that day that Anakim were there. These are giants. You heard on that day that the Anakim were there. This is the day that the spies came back and gave the report. You heard on that day that Anakim were there with great fortified cities. Perhaps Yahweh will be with me, and I will drive them out as the Lord has spoken. Now it sounds like Caleb is hoping that God will be with them, but that's not how it's constructed. He knows absolutely and for certain, I will take my hillside. It's interesting that Caleb still has this faith in the power of God because of all the things that the 12 spies, or at least the 10 spies, were terrified of. The things that were listed were the giants in the land of Canaan and the fortified cities. And here Caleb says 45 years earlier, we can take the land because Yahweh has given it to us. 45 years go by, and look at what it is that Caleb has to deal with. Caleb gets to deal with the giants and some of the fortified cities. So he's going up against the giants and the fortified cities that his fellow spies were terrified of 45 years ago. I love that. I love how Yahweh gives Caleb the giants and the fortified cities. Prove to everyone who will ever read this book that you were right, Caleb, in trusting me fully. Because you were going to take the giants then, and you were going to take the fortified cities then, and I'm going to prove now through this 85-year-old man that what I could have done then, I will do now. It's a beautiful story, this Caleb. Verse 13, how does Joshua respond to this impassioned plea of Caleb's? Joshua blessed him, his old friend Caleb. For 40 years, can you imagine the tightness of the relationship between Joshua and Caleb? They had a camaraderie. They were part of a two-man fraternity that no one else could ever get into. They were the only two men that survived. Even their friend Moses. Even their friend Moses didn't get to go into the land. They were the only two men of their generation. Imagine that, you guys, from whatever generation you're from, imagine you and one other man being the only living people in your group that were a part of that generation. There are no other 50-year-olds, only you and your friend Joshua. Nobody else in all of Israel is in your age group, your high school class. They're all gone. Only two, Joshua and Caleb. It would have been a phenomenal relationship here. I love that Joshua blessed Caleb, and he gave Hebron to Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, for an inheritance. Of all the people in the Bible, Caleb gets a special piece of land given to him by God. Verse 14 says, "Therefore Hebron became the inheritance of Caleb, the son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite, until this day, because he followed the Lord God of Israel fully." Now it is interesting, if you go to Hebron today, you know who controls the city of Hebron? The Muslim Palestinians. The city of Hebron is an interesting city. We went there, Amy and I, when we went to Israel, because it's in the city of Hebron where the patriarchs of Israel are buried. Not only did Caleb, you think, okay, Caleb got his own piece of land, big deal. What's the significance of Hebron? It's where the cave of Machpelah is. It's where God chose to lay in rest Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, and his son Jacob and Leah. They are all in Hebron, being kept over by the people of Caleb. He's the overseer of the grave of the patriarchs of Israel. That's what the land of Hebron is. Run today in a split land, in a divided land by the Palestinians. Verse 15 says, "Now the name of Hebron was formerly Kiriath Arba, for Arba was the greatest man among the Anakim." So not only did God save the giants for Caleb to kill, but he gave Caleb the fiercest of the giants to kill. What an honor. What an honor Caleb had, that he could follow the Lord in destroying the giants that his friends, the other 10 spies, were terrified of. Arba was the greatest man among the Anakim, among the giants, and then the land had rest from war. So here we are at the end of 45 years, the land being apportioned out, the tribe of Judah going forth, Caleb taking his opportunity to go to his friend Joshua to plant his history again in Joshua's mind, to be blessed by Joshua to take over one of the most sacred pieces of land in all of the land of Israel, the cave of Machpelah, where the patriarchs of Israel lay in wait for the resurrection of the Lord. Let's close in prayer. Father,